Hi class, this is your instructor, Scholar Huff. We are now in the 39th chapter, and this is Animal Structure and Functions and Introduction. So as we're here on page 821, just keep in mind we're getting into the way in which the animal species here on Earth are just so dramatically diverse, they have radically different body structures. For example, consider how different, as you can see on page 821, how different the elephant and the bird are. And as I say that, they're not just different, I guess I'll say, here in size, but they're also different in body form as well as their lifestyle. So despite their differences, animal groups share many characteristics, including their relatively large size. So the question begs, why are most animals larger than bacteria, archaea, protists, and fungi? Having posed such a question, the answer may very well relate to their ecological niches. It's their functional roles of a species within a community. So by the time animals evolved, other organisms already occupied most available ecological niches. For a new species to succeed, they had to displace others from a niche or adapt to a new one. So success in a new niche required a new body plan, and new body plans often required larger size. So increased size also provided more opportunities for capturing food. So predators are typical, of course, larger than their prey. So to grow larger than their bacteria and protist competitors, animals had to be multicellular. So please think back to your first biology course in which you took that, of course, it says the size of a single cell is limited by the ratio of its surface area to its volume. So the plasma membrane needs to be large enough relative to the cell's volume to permit passage of materials into and out of the cell, so that the conditions necessary for life can be maintained. So here in a multicellular animal, each cell has a large enough ratio of surface area to volume to effectively regulate its internal environment. So individual cells live and die, and they are replaced while the organism continues to maintain itself and thrive. So the number of cells, not their individual sizes, is mainly responsible for the size of an animal. In unicellular organisms such as bacteria and many protists, the single cell carries on all activities necessary for life. So keep in mind that the unicellular and small, flat organisms depend on diffusion for many life processes such as gas exchange and disposal of those metabolic wastes. So with all of this in mind, just know that one reason that they can be small is that they do not require complex organ systems like multicellular organisms do. So with this in mind, here we'll focus in this chapter on two basic principles, and they are as follows: anatomy and physiology. So as you all think of anatomy, please think of and link anatomy to structure, because that's essentially what anatomy is. It's that organism structure, or an organism's structure, the study of such, as opposed to physiology. So when you think of physiology, please think of the bodily function, or how a system functions, such as it would be, of course, in the physiology of some body system, such as that cardiovascular system, or such as that integumentary system, or even that nervous system physiology. So with those two in mind, just keep in note that those biological systems and the structures are adapted to the function at every level of organization. So just keep in mind, we'll also get to an important concept known as homeostasis, using the regulation of body temperature as an example. So let's get to where we're going right now, class, with the first section of the chapter on page 822, being tissues, organs, and organ systems. So here, just keep in mind that in a multicellular organism, cells specialize to perform specific tasks. And even from the first chapter in the text, back from your first biology course, it's cells that are organized to form tissues, and tissues that associate to form organs, such as the heart or even your stomach, and it's those groups of tissues and organs that make up organ systems of a complex organism. So it's billions of cells that organize to form the tissues, organs, and organ systems of an elephant, of a crocodile, or an alligator, or even, of course, a lobster or a shrimp. So keeping that in mind, class, let's get to where we're going here. So I've just briefly reviewed the levels of organization from that most basic level, class, being that cellular level, or those known as cells. And then from cells, we then get to the next level, being that tissue level, for those that may have missed it, the tissue level. And then thereafter tissues, class, we go directly into the organ level. So I'll put the organ level. And after the organ level, class, we get to the organ system. The organ system. And then ultimately, class, we get to the organismal level, or the organism. So there you have it. So with all of these in mind, just keep in here that the tissues are defined by being made up of similar cells that carry out specific functions. And with that, there are 4 basic types of animal tissues. Those animal tissues, class, are as follows. So first things first, we have epithelial tissue, or epithelium. There is connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue, or nervous tissue. So the way in which these are classified is they're classified basically on structure and then origin. So let's keep in mind those 2 things as we continue on with the first of 4 types, being the epithelial tissues. So epithelial tissue consists of cells fitted tightly together to form a continuous sheet or layer of cells. So typical of which you find these, class, on the surface. So typical of which is going to be they're on the surface covering the body, such as that outer layer of skin, or even, class, lining cavities, such as the lumen. And I say lumen, such as the lumen of the mouth, or of course the lumen, class, of our intestines. So the other surface of that epithelial layer, class, may be attached to some non-cellular basement membrane, and we'll get to that a little later. So with this in mind, in function, class, you can say this tightly fitted cells that form a continuous sheet or layer of cells cover the body or lines a cavity. So with this in mind, what also happens is that epithelial tissues are also responsible, class, in regulating the exchange between the body and that external environment. So other functions include, class, protection, such as that from your skin, absorption, class, such as in the intestines, secretion, class, by way of those glands, being that glandular epithelium, and then finally, class, it even functions in sensation, and yes, receptors, class, for our smell, taste, hearing, and vision. So with that in mind, I guess I'll get to glandular epithelium in just a moment. I'll now, class, classify epithelium by shape, and hereafter we get to layer. So first things first, squamous epithelium. So we have those thin, flat cells, such as what you see here, and that dark skinny nucleus, class, typical of which to be near the center. So that would be, of course, from that top view. And if I wanted to draw more of which I would, but I guess I'll leave it as that. Excuse me. Next, of course, would be those cuboidal cells. And it's in the name, like ESPN would say it's in the game, or EA Sports would say it's in the game. Well, it's in the name. Cuboidal cells are cube-like, with that dark staining nucleus, class, being such as there. And then lastly, class, would be, of course, columnar cells. And then those columnar cells, as in the name, appear, class, just as a column would, such as I'm drawing now for you, with the dark staining nucleus, class, typically wish to be there near the bottom. So sometimes, class, it may be referred to as being ciliated columnar cells, or even pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, But of course, what you see there, class, are those cilia. There. So those, of course, are ways in which to classify epithelial cells by shape. So now let's classify them. I guess I'll go back to classifying them by layer. So to classify epithelium class, or at least those cells by layer, there are only two classifications. The first class is referred to as being simple. Yes, simple, literally. So simple refers to one layer. That's a bullet. One layer. So typical of which is for epithelium class to have two names. The first name class will be, of course, by layer. The second name class will be by shape. For instance, simple squamous means that there is a single layer class of squamous cells. Up next, it could be very well said to be simple cuboidal. Yet again, class, one layer of cuboidal cells. And the same class goes with simple columnar. So the second way to classify them by layer class is going to be stratified. Stratified. So of course, stratified squamous cells would mean that their class are many layers. M-A-N-Y. Many layers. And I'll leave it at stratified squamous because there won't be class any stratified cuboidal or stratified columnar cells. And the last way to classify them by layer class, which I guess you say is a bit different but yet the same, is pseudo-stratified. That's P-S-E-U-D-O, pseudo-stratified. And when I say pseudo-stratified, such as a pseudonym may be, its class appearing to be stratified, but yet in still, it's only a single layer of those epithelial cells. And typical of which class is for it to be pseudo-stratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. And I did just say that. Pseudo-stratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. And that's very specific. And I would say specific class of the respiratory tract. And I'll get to that a little bit later. There you have it. So up next, we'll get on to simple epithelium. So with simple epithelium class, as you see it, typical of which class, this will be in an area class that is, in this case, one layer of cells as mentioned class, but this will be for absorption class, secretion, excretion, or even class diffusion of the gas, of gases. And as I say it this way, I guess I'll go with secretion class. Let's go to secretion. So think of class secretion being a product. A product. Oh boy, that looks kind of interesting there. So again, I'll say class products are secreted. Products are secreted. As opposed to excretion class, I would say that wastes are excreted. Wastes are excreted. And that's a great distinction to make. So, of course, products be secreted class by glands, and the wastes are excreted class by way of course, whatever that is secreting such a waste, such as the secretion class of metabolic wastes. Absorption class would occur in the intestines, and then, of course, diffusion class would most definitely occur class in the alveoli of your lungs. In the alveoli of your lungs is where class the process of diffusion occurs. So of course oxygen would diffuse into the lungs, and CO2 class would be diffusing out of the lungs by way of the alveoli, part of the bronchial tree. I'm erasing all the ink here, class, to get back to where I am now. To get back. So here on the bottom left-hand corner, class, you're seeing those flat, simple squamous cells here. It will look just like this in lab. In the center class, you're seeing, of course, simple cuboidal cells. So that is the lumen class. It says of the tubule there. And, of course, those dark shiny nuclei there. So lumen is that opening on the inside. And then this looks to be, it appears to be simple columnar cells here that are likely there with microvilli and goblet cells. Next up is stratified epithelium class. Of course, you now see there are many layers, M-A-N-Y, many layers. and typical which is this is to protect, such as the stratified epithelium class that makes up our skin. Was their class to protect, or the stratified epithelium class that's found in a moist area, such as in the vagina. Here class is pseudostratified epithelium, and it states it appears to be many layers class, but yet and still it's just one layer. And notice class, it is ciliated. So this would be pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Next up, the glands to end things, class. So the gland is made up of one or more epithelial cells which secrete and produce some product. So examples, class, of products created, class, and secreted are things such as hormones, enzymes, saliva, wax, mucus, milk, and even, class, sweat. We must have these things, class, secreted. And there's a further distinction, class, between the two types of glands. So I'll begin, class, with the exocrine gland. So exocrine glands are typically glands with ducts. I repeat, typically these have ducts. With that means that sweat glands are an example, and they secrete, class, the product to the body's free surface, to the free epithelial surface. Exocrine glands. Secondly, class, we get now due to the endocrine glands. So the endocrine glands, a bit different here. They're typically going to be a ductless gland. So I'll put here, class, they're typically ductless glands. And usually they'll secrete their product, class, into, I guess I'll say, the blood or the interstitial fluid. So with that, these are going to be those long distance messengers, class, getting the product, class, to the places it goes to cause that change. So there you have it, class. And with epithelial membranes, class, I'll be here quite briefly. But the mucous membrane, class, is what lines a body cavity that opens through the outside of the body, such as the digestive tract or the respiratory tract. And goblet cells are here, class, to secrete the mucus that does provide lubrication and protect the membrane, class, from drying. A serous membrane, however, it lines the body cavity that does not open to the outside of the body with simple squamous epithelium. So with this, examples here would be maybe the pleural membrane that lines the pleural cavity, such as the lungs, the pleural, or even, class, what lines the pericardial cavity, which surrounds the heart. These are serous membranes. And there is serous fluid, and there is serous fluid between the two, class, to ensure, class, that everything glides, I guess you would say, seamlessly and does not stick. Because if any stickings occurs, there may be, class, what is called pleurisy or pericarditis, which will be inflammation, class, in each respective case. The lung, class, as well as the heart. Up next, class, we get to connective tissues. So I'm now, class, in the second of 4. I repeat, this is the second of 4 basic types of animal tissues. So here, connective tissue, class, is wholly different from what we just did with epithelial tissue. So to help you with connective tissues, class, think of connective tissues being here, class, to support other body structures, plain and simple. So cells are here embedded, class, within an intercellular substance within a thread-like, I would say a thread-like matrix. So it's that thread-like matrix, class, that makes connective tissue, I say, so unique. And I did say that thread-like matrix. And I guess to say it another way, class, that there are, in this case, I said there are relatively few cells. Relatively few cells are found here, class, in the connective tissues. And you find this, class, pretty much throughout the body. So I put here in the notes for you, class, almost every organ in the body is supported by connective tissue. So just keep in mind, because this is consisting of cells within that thread-like fibers in that matrix, because that is what defines the connective tissues by and large. So with this, there are three main fibers involved. They are as follows: collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers. Collagen class is the most abundant fiber, and in fat class, it's 25% protein. That mass of which class is what makes up most of me class and most of you. Meaning, collagen class, that most abundant protein in us called animals, accounts for more than 25% of our entire protein mass. So it's tough, I repeat, a very tough protein. That's why class meat is tough. I mean, imagine eating a steak class that, of course, is tough. We want to chew through that all day. But, of course, the reason being class is because collagen is that very tough protein. So if ever you smoke, meaning smoke meat, like I smoke meat from time to time, that is why class meat is smoked. I guess they call it low and slow. So it has tensile strength, amazing strength. So it has that ability to stretch without tearing. Because, of course, the fibers of collagen class are comparable to that of steel. So those collagen fibers, they are wavy and flexible, and they can remain intact class when stretched. On to the next, called elastic. So elastic is branched with networks, and it can stretch when force is applied and then return class to its original size. So it's composed of the protein class called elastin. Next class is the reticular fibers. Here, they're very thin, and they join our connective tissues to neighboring tissues, consisting, of course, collagen class and glycoprotein. So up next, we have a few cells. I won't spend much time here, class, on the cells, but of course they're called fibroblasts. And what fibroblasts do is they produce, class, the fibers, protein, and carbohydrate portions of that extracellular matrix. And then we have macrophages. So the macrophages, of course, are here, class, to engulf things that are not of the self, meaning it says foreign matter, things that are not of the self. So you can think of the class being functioning class in immunity. So they're here, class, to ensure debris is cleaned, and of course that includes bacteria. So we're now getting into, class, those types of connective tissue. So as we've got to these types of connective tissue, class, there lists 7 main types. And to help you out, class, I will go through these, but I would say please focus more so, class, on the latter 4 types. So they are as follows, class. They are loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue, so the loose and dense connective tissues, elastic connective tissue, reticular connective tissue, adipose, cartilage, bone, and blood. Let us now begin. So with loose connective tissue, class, we find this, class, deep to our epithelium, meaning it's just beneath the epithelial layer. So it forms that subcutaneous layer that attaches our skin and, of course, other structures to muscle. Skin to muscle, as well as the others, even, class, the nerves, for instance. So with this, class, it's a reservoir for salt and fluid. This is, class, what loose connective tissue looks like. And I hope this looks as a great contrast to what you saw earlier in what we know as epithelium. Notice it's a lot fewer cells, meaning you see the nuclei class of fibroblasts, and thereafter, most of which, class, are just those fibers. That matrix, that extracellular matrix, dense connective tissue, is found in the lower layer of skin. And with this, we have lots of collagen fibers. And then the tendons and ligaments, class, are most of which to be dense connective tissue. This, class, is how it looks. And I will not have a slide of this. I will not have a slide of this on any test. Up next is elastic. So we find elastic, class, as being in places such as the lungs or the walls of our large arteries, allowing those structures to expand and then, of course, return to original size. Again, I will not have this on your test. Reticular connective tissue, class, it supports, of course, organs such as the liver, spleen, and our lymph nodes. You won't see this, class, either on your test. What you will see on your test, class, is before you, adipose. So in function class, adipose, which has cells class known as adipocytes. So adipocytes are those cells, and of course you're seeing those nuclei, their class of adipocytes. So typical of which is for the nucleus class to be at the periphery of that cell, and you're seeing class the fat that takes up most of which of that cell. That's the fat. So in function class, what adipose does is to, of course, store energy. I repeat, it stores copious amounts of energy, and of course in the form of fat. Because if you keep in mind, class, fat stores so much more energy, class, than, of course, a carbohydrate will ever store. Carbs, class, are used thereafter, as opposed to, class, lipids, of course, being that source of stored energy. So adipose class is also here to provide cushioning or support, class. And one thing I forgot since I'm here, class, in connective tissue, I forgot to mention, class, earlier that tendons connect muscle to bone. Tendons, class, connect muscle to bone. And ligaments, class, connect bone to bone. Ligaments, you all, connect bone to bone. I don't know how I forgot to mention it earlier. I'm sorry. Up next, class, is cartilage. So here, since we are in cartilage, class, to help you out, the cells of cartilage, class, are called chondrocytes. Chondrocytes are the cells of cartilage. So to help you with that, I say those chondrocytes lie in lacunae. Chondrocytes, class, lie, I say, in lacunae. The same class is shown, and the explicit stated right there. So with that, keep in mind that cartilage, as it is, it's avascular, having no blood supply. It's a vascular class, and it's not innervated. It's avascular class and not innervated, i.e. it has no nerve supply. Hence, of course, if in fact, class, you've ever had, I guess, a tear of cartilage, it likely, class, did not heal well, and that's primarily because, of course, there is no, class, supply of blood. And if it didn't hurt, that would be because, of course, there are no nerves within your cartilage. Let's get now, class, those different types of cartilage. So this class shows you hyaline cartilage. You will see this class in lab. It may very well sit on your test, but most definitely, class, look for a lab test. So what you're seeing, class, are the lacunae there, lacunae there, lacunae. So those two lacunae, class, with chondrocyte within, and the, of course, nucleus of that chondrocyte. That's cartilage, class. Up next, class, is bone. So with bone, the mature cells of bone, class, are known as osteocytes. Mature bone cells, class, are known as osteocytes. So just as we saw, class, in cartilage, osteocytes lie in lacunae. So I'll say they lie in lacunae. And I will not say lacuna matata. However, what I will say, class, is unlike cartilage, bone is highly vascular. It has an amazing blood supply, class. And not just that, but bone, class, is also innervated. So I'll write here, it is innervated, i.e. it has a nerve supply. So if ever you've broken a bone, class, that likely did hurt. The reason being, nerves are within. So as I continue with bone, class, there are, of course, a couple of types of bone. So one type of bone, class, is called compact bone, and the other type, class, is known as spongy bone. So I guess thinking out loud here, let's see if I can draw a quick bone for us. Let's draw a long bone. So of course, if that would be that epiphysis, and this is the diaphysis, typical of which, class, is going to be on the edge, such as here, on the very edge of which is going to be where you find the compact bone. And then on the interior of this class is where you find the spongy bone. So within bone class, meaning by way of the bone marrow, meaning the marrow cavity, is where we get class our blood cells. Haven't gotten to blood yet, but by the process class of hematopoiesis, all of our blood cells are synthesized. They are made class in that bone marrow, the red bone marrow to be particularly correct. So what happens is, it's by way of our adult. I did say adult. It's called adult stem cells. So your adult stem cells class within the red bone marrow gives rise to all of our blood cells, i.e. I'm not there yet, but our red blood cells class as well as our white blood cells. I was trying not to get to, of course, red blood cells and white blood cells, but I just couldn't hold back. So since we are here, what I'll do now, class, is I'll kind of get to what bone looks like microscopically. So I guess I'll do a bit of drawing here. So what I have here, class, will be the osteon system or Haversian system, or even the Haversian. Now that's the Haversian canal. So that class is known as the Haversian canal. And you may also hear it known as the osteon canal. Osteon canal. I don't know why this thing does that sometimes. The osteon canal. That's Ostion, the osteon or Haversian canal. So what I'll do now, class, is I'm going to draw here around that my concentric lamellae. So the Haversian canal is there in the center. And I'll call this a lamella. So that, class, is a lamella. So to be plural, you would call them, class, lamellae. Now that I've drawn those, it's going to be interesting to draw my... there we go. So you'll see this in lab. What I'm drawing for you all now, with each of those lines that would make up, class, those concentric lamellae, I could draw this a whole lot better face to face. I'm quite sure of. So what I've drawn there, class, are osteocytes within lacunae. So these are osteocytes within lacunae. And then the last portion I'll draw here that connects those dark-staining osteocytes with the lacunae, class, are known as the canaliculi. And I'll say it again and write it out for you in just a moment. So these lines going out from there are the canaliculi. So they are canaliculi. And those are those lines I've drawn there. I guess I should have used a bit of color, Huff. Excuse me, you all. And I wrote Haversian canal here, and I should have put with blood vessels. With blood vessels, meaning, of course, the vein, the artery, and the nerve. That's bone, you all. Take your time, study it, learn it. Up next, class, blood. So within blood, class, it's different. And you say different, yes, because it has what is known as, class, a liquid extracellular matrix. It has that liquid extracellular matrix. That is what makes it oh so different. So blood is specialized within that intracellular substance and that liquid extracellular matrix. So of course we have those biconcave red blood cells And of course, along with those biconcave red blood cells, we have those dark staining white blood cells that by and large look like, how do I want to describe these things? They look purple, I'll put it that way. Hope that's a great way to describe them. And then of course there are also platelets class to aid in clotting. So with this, just keep in mind that it's the blood class that is responsible for, of course, the carrying of oxygen by way of the heme groups, by way of hemoglobin and those heme groups. Up next, we're getting into, of course, the microscopic picture to show you what blood cells look like specifically. So here, of course, red blood cells, they're biconcave. Hence you see the little light stained area there. Should have had a different color. I apologize for that color. Suppose this will show up well. So yes, they're biconcave red blood cells. That class shows white blood cells, and of course, there you have it. And I'll guess, yeah, that's enough of which. Up next class is muscle tissue. So muscle is specialized to contract. Keep it in mind, that is the role. Contraction, contraction, contraction to allow us class to move, such as it being by way of skeletal muscle. And I'll leave it at skeletal muscle. So, typical which is for muscle to be described as having long cylindrical shaped cells and or spindle shaped cells. And with this, each muscle fiber contains many thin, I repeat, the muscle fibers contain many thin contractile units known as myofibrils with two proteins within, known as actin and myosin. So actin and myosin, those contractile proteins. For instance, I'll draw this as being myosin. There is the myosin head I'm drawing there. And the other of which I'll change my color. This class is actin, that is there. And along with it, I'm going to add to that. Let's go with this color here. We have this that looks in that way, and let's just get to it. So what we have before you, class, is myosin in black. Oh, there it goes again. We have myosin in black, and then we have in purple class, actin. And along with that, we also have the contractile portions of such. And when I mention these contractile portions, it's this that is responsible for the way in which contraction occurs. I'm grabbing another color here. Let's go here. I'll call this tropo. That's tropomyosin. That's tropomyosin. And then I'll add to tropomyosin class here in blue troponin. It doesn't really look blue, but that is troponin. So what happens is, in function, tropomyosin blocks the active sites on actin. However, as intracellular calcium levels rise, calcium binds to troponin, and as calcium, and I'll draw Ca2 plus for the calcium ions, as calcium binds to troponin, it will then class roll away the tropomyosin blocker, which blocks the active sites on actin, to allow those myosin heads to bind to actin, and of course cause contraction to occur. And that is enough of that. So what I'll get to nextly will be, I guess I'll get into the differing types of muscle individually. So there are three types of muscle. There are skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. So here, class, I'll begin to draw 3 MFs, meaning 3 muscle fibers. So skeletal muscle, by definition, class, of course, are those large muscles attached to bones, and they are, of course, with many nuclei. So what I'll add now will be my striations. Skeletal muscle is striated, and its striated appearance, class, comes from those alternating light and dark bands, which I won't get much more into. So those are the striations. What will be here, class, in purple are those nuclei, meaning these muscle fibers, notice I'm not calling them cells, these muscle fibers are multinucleate. In other words, that's why you see more than one nucleus, class, per muscle fiber. So MF, that's a muscle fiber, and of course there are 2 muscle fibers, class, to the left of that muscle fiber. So with that, I guess I'll just make sure you know that since this is skeletal muscle, it is voluntary. That means, class, you control it. And I'll leave it at that. That's enough of which. Next up, class, is cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle, class, is branched. It has branched complex networks. It, too, is striated, class. However, what makes it unique is that it has intercalated. It has intercalated discs. It has intercalated discs at gap junctions. It has intercalated discs, class, at gap junctions. And that's important to know. And I say it's important to know. Make that C a K. I'm sorry, you all. It's because that's where those fibers join, but it's also, class, with those complex branched networks. That's what allows, of course, you to easily discern whether or not, class, it's cardiac muscle cardiac muscle or skeletal muscle. And along with that, in case you haven't figured it out, class, you find this in, of course, the walls of your and my heart. Next up, class, is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle, class, is cigar-shaped or spindle-shaped or cylindrical or, yeah. But we find these, class, making up the walls of those hollow organs, such as the digestive tract, the blood vessels, and the uterus even. So with this, these cigar-shaped cells or spindle-shaped cells are not striated. It's in the name. It's called smooth muscle, be it circular smooth muscle or longitudinal smooth muscle. But what happens here, class, is when smooth muscle in the walls of our arterioles contract, the vessels constrict, and, class, this is what increases blood pressure. So although skeletal muscle tires quickly, tires easily, this involuntary smooth muscle, class, is, I guess you would say, it's what tires slowly. I'll put it tires slowly. And since it tires slowly, class, smooth muscle can remain contracted for long periods of time, in that it can change, class, its set point to where your blood pressure, class, is not just, I guess you say, elevated, but it remains elevated due to, of course, that slightly contracted state of smooth muscle. And I don't think I stated it here, class, but make sure you know that cardiac muscle is also involuntary. We cannot control it. I've said in the past, if in fact, class, it were voluntary, it may very well be that people are dying, class, just because they forgot to keep their heart going. This way, class, it just goes and goes and goes and goes. So, class, that has been muscle. Up next, class, this is a table. This table, class, I say, is amazing because it puts a lot of information in one place to allow you all to discern the differing types, class, of muscle. Here, class, I'm moving on to what is called nerve tissue. So nervous tissue, class, is quite different in that it consists of 2 types of cells. But before I get to those 2 types of cells, class, keep in mind that what nerve tissue does in function is it controls, class, muscles and glands. That's just a quick and easy way to define it. So to keep on going with this, the 2 types of cells, class, are called neurons and glial cells, or support cells, or neuroglia. So you can call them glial cells, you can call them support cells, or even class neuroglia. Neurons, class, receive and transmit signals. Period. End of story. I would say get that and you'll know it. What a neuron does, class, and function is receive and transmit signals. And I guess I'll do more of that in just a moment. Glial cells are there to nourish neuron, class, to aid in the transmission of impulses, and in some cases, class, function and immunity to destroy pathogens. So with that being the case, I guess I'll get on into what's next. But just keep in mind this little tidbit here. I say tidbit. Bingo. Put in a blue box. Why blue? I don't know. Some neurons states it transmits signals, class, from the brain and spinal cord to the muscles and glands. Class, that is what I'll say the function is. For instance, I did a bit of work here, class, about smooth muscle, about cardiac muscle, about skeletal muscle. I say it this way. Nothing here in muscle, class, occurs unless, of course, first there is a nerve impulse. So it has to be, class, that electric message before it's ever, class, going to be anything to allow your arm to move, or your leg to move, or even me, class, to go through this lecture as I am going through it now. Let's get now to the neuron. So the neuron, class, as it states before you, it has, of course, a cell body, which I am pretty much going over here. Give me just a moment. All right. So the cell body, class, is in the center where I now have this little black circle or black whatever that is. That's, of course, a cell body and nucleus. So I put here cell body with nucleus. These, class, are dendrites. I'll draw the arrow. Those are the dendrites. And then we have this long axon. And, of course, nerve impulses go in one direction. So the dendrites are that receptor region of the neuron. They receive and transmit those signals, class, to the cell body. Then thereafter, that nerve impulse goes down that long axon, class, either to, of course, some muscle or to postsynaptic neuron. So from neuron to neuron to neuron, or from neuron to gland. And I haven't really done much with these, but I'll draw now before you, class, in a not so quickly fashion. But what happens, class, is many neurons, class, are myelinated. And I say they are myelinated, meaning those are Schwann cells in this case. Schwann cells. And are referred to Schwann cells because Schwann cells are found, class, in the PNS, referring to the peripheral nervous system. So those Schwann cells form the myelin sheath. I'm going to do a bit more with that. They form, class, the myelination. That looks very funny. Myelination. But as they do it, class, this is what makes transmission of nerve impulses faster. I repeat, this is what makes transmission of nerve impulses faster. I guess I should put this a dot on this I so you can spell that correctly. That's myelin, myelin, or the myelin sheath. The process of myelination, class, speeds up conductions of nerve impulses. I mean, they go, class, hundreds of miles an hour. That's why you can touch, class, this hot stove. That's why you can, I guess you say touch, I guess you say something else that's hot. And then snatch back your hand very quickly because, class, it is just that fast that those nerve impulses, class, are being fired. And it's all because, of course, the Schwann cells that make up the myelin sheath that allow action potentials to jump, class, from node of RON VA to node of RON VA to node of RON VA. And I'm saying node of RON VA. And that's what's between those Schwann cells that make up that myelin sheath. And that's the only place, class, the action potentials are in the case of the myelinated axons here at this neuron. This is what it looks like, class, being nerve tissue microscopically. So the organs and organ systems. So as I mentioned, class, there are, of course, organs that work together, class, closely, meaning that closely organized group of tissues and organs performing, class, a specialized function make up the organ system. So what happened is being as old as you are, class, I am pretty well confident that you all have heard of organ systems. So if you look in your textbook, class, on pages 832, I don't know why I'm writing in red, excuse me. So on pages 832, class, going over to 833, you all will find those 11 major organ systems of the body. I'll say, class, take time to review them. The integumentary system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, the nervous system, the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system, the immune and lymphatic system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, the urinary system, and the male and female reproductive systems. So just keep in mind those systems, class. There is a brief description, class, of those found on those 2 pages. If you have questions about those, please come by the office, email me, or ask me, class, before or even after lab. So let's get to regulation, class, of our internal environment. So as we are here, just keep in mind that homeostasis is that balanced internal environment that is, of course, controlled by homeostatic mechanisms. So this is what maintains those relatively constant internal conditions. And I'll put it this way, class. Stressors always are around. Stressors. S-T-E, stressors. Stressors, class. I'll say they cause change. They challenge homeostasis. And I guess writing in red makes it that even a stressor. So what homeostasis does is it ensures, class, everything within you and everything within me, class, remains normal. I'm going backwards to here. It's by way of our homeostatic mechanisms, by way of negative feedback, that things as such, with all of those 11 organ systems, class, remain as they should. So changes in our environment, class, challenge homeostasis all of the time. However, class, our body, by way of our hypothalamus, keeps things, class, within those narrow limits. To kind of contrast things, a conformer, class, such as many marine invertebrates, class, they conform to their surroundings, as opposed to who we are, class, called regulators. So we have those complex homeostatic mechanisms that maintain those relatively constant internal conditions, class, no matter what's going on outside. Well, this class is now getting cool in the fall, or this class now warming up, class, in the spring. Things, class, do not change. And if they do change, they're changing, class, only within those very narrow limits. So many homeostatic mechanisms, class, are feedback systems, and let's make it make sense. For instance, we have, class, sensors. So we have the sensor, class, that is there to detect change. Sensors detect change, class, meaning that's a deviation, class, from the set point. Class, the set point is that, I guess you call it, it's that homeostatic level, or that homeostatic, I guess you call it, number. Let's get numerical. That, of course, all of those things within the body must be at. And, of course, if there is any, class, deviation from that set point, we then, of course, have effectors. I say again, we then, class, have effectors. And I write that as E-F-F-E-C-T-O-R-S. We have effectors, class, that, of course, affect change to get us, class, back to homeostasis. So let's get to how all of this works. And if you have questions, please ask. Let's get to negative feedback. So with negative feedback, I guess I'll go here, and I know this is a textbook, and I enjoy this textbook. I like the textbook a lot, but I'm not going to use this thermostat here because we're learning about animals. So I'm going to use this that is here. Class, let us begin. So let's say you're outdoors, and it's almost like to say winter. I won't say the dead of winter. but it's winter, so your body temperature class decreases below the set point. Well, the reason it happened, of course, is because it's cold outside. So what happens is the receptor class, being your thermoreceptors, will of course monitor that change. And it will send that information class to your hypothalamus. And I like to call the hypothalamus our control center, meaning it, A, determines class the set point, and it, B, determines the appropriate response to any deviation class from that set point. So, of course, it then states and knows that since your body temperature class has become lower, let's just say an approximate 96 degrees Fahrenheit, it will, of course, then cause class you to, of course, have those effectors known as your skeletal muscles will begin to make you shiver. In one case, that involuntary shivering class is, of course, your effector by way of the muscles, your skeletal muscles, to produce heat. Your blood vessels class will constrict. And this class, in turn, should increase your body temperature and, of course, get you back to what is called homeostasis. That's just one case of negative feedback class. Up next, this class gives you the very same, only in this case class, this is what happens in the event class that your body temperature increases. I'll say class, please check this out on the time that you have class on your own. I'm moving on now, class, to a second example. Now to positive feedback. So with positive feedback, it is, I say, wholly different than negative feedback. In that with positive feedback, there is, I guess you call it, some change in that steady state that intensifies that change. So as opposed to negative feedback that would reverse the change, take you back to homeostasis, you can think of positive feedback class as taking you class, further and further, I say further and further away from homeostasis. And to help you out, class, positive feedback can actually be fatal. So I would say it this way. You can think of positive feedback class as occurring class in I guess you say in those infrequent events. For instance, let's go to childbirth. By way of childbirth class, as the child reaches the birth canal, a set of events class are triggered to, of course, cause those reflexive contractions to work to expel the baby through the birth canal until ultimately the baby has been birthed. And of course, thereafter, those conditions should cease. A second example class would most very well be, of course, the cervix would dilate, Huff. I didn't mention that. But it's all because of the baby reaching the birth canal, the head of the baby. But in a second example class, let's say that you were cut, or I were cut, and cut deep enough to bleed. As that happens, class, it will set off a chain of events by way of that break within the blood vessel wall to cause platelets to begin to adhere to that site, class, of the break. So as that occurs, more chemicals are released to cause more platelets to be released, and to cause more platelets to be attracted to the same area to eventually class form that platelet plug to stop you from bleeding. And of course, in that feedback cycle. However, class, in some cases, that may not be the case, and a blood clot could form and potentially, class, kill you. Or kill me. So, I'll just put it as being that, class, this is how we are, and this is how we live, by way of these feedback systems. And primarily, class, I would say negative feedback systems, or what keep us alive. So with that, on your test, class, prepare yourselves to be able to explain what is homeostasis, and how homeostasis is maintained by way of negative feedback with an example, an explained example, and be able to explain what is positive feedback, class, with one of those brief named examples. So with this, class, just keep in mind that thermoregulation is how we maintain the body temperature within those within those narrow limits by way of negative feedback. So this has been your instructor, Skylar Hunt, and this has been Chapter 9. If there's anything you all need help with, please ask questions. Please let me know. Study well, class, and prepare well. This has been the last chapter for your test. Thank you all for listening and have a great day.